Ironically, Carey himself was a late adopter of Facebook, but as with all things, when he finally did join, he joined with a vengeance. Now, I know there are at least 3 people in this room, my parents and Carey's mother, who don't really know what Facebook is or how it works. So very briefly, Facebook is an evil corporate conspiracy that entices otherwise intelligent adults to divulge all kinds of personal information, which is then sold by Facebook to its real customers, other corporations, so that they can micro-target their own products to us. It does this by providing free of charge a platform for us to create personal profiles through which to communicate our tastes and our interests to old friends and to make new ones. One way of doing this is to click a button indicating that you like something, say the New Yorker magazine, or the Beatles, or perhaps the ACLU. That information is then shared with your friends and fed into Facebook supercomputers to create complex consumer profiles. Typical Facebook users might list a few dozen likes. Carey's Facebook page listed 446 likes. They included Rainer Maria Rilke, cheese, doing nothing, the Crock-Pot blog, American Express. I can understand why Carey would have liked American Express, but I know for a fact that the feeling was not mutual. Islam. Sorry, Rabbi. The Chicago Manual of Style. The Count of Monte Cristo. Megan Greenlee Photography. Bennington College alumni. Interstate 69. Somewhere in Silicon Valley, a supercomputer is exploding, and a marketing specialist is scratching his head. I think it's fair to say that in his typical all-embracing exuberance, Carey probably beat the system. The truth is that if the remarkable memorial page we've created together is one reason not to be entirely cynical about Facebook, its potential as a vehicle for social activism is another. Here again, Carey was an enthusiastic pioneer. To Carey's 785 Facebook friends around the world, the struggle against helicopter noise pollution in Red Hook had all the urgency and vividness of the Arab Spring. And only Carey could create a Facebook page for a local softball team and use it to connect to labor activists around the globe while raising funds for numerous local charities. Carey's enthusiasms were contagious, but he would not have wanted us to sugarcoat them, or him. Sometimes Carey's obsessions could be exhausting, or even alarming. One might wake up to 3 or 5 or 7 long emails that Carey had written during a sleepless night of what he himself described as a state of frightful exaltation. What does it feel like? I once asked him. It's hard to explain, he wrote. Everything blooms in my perception, opens directly, reveals itself and seems almost to be approaching while at the same time standing perfectly still in stately repose. One has the experience of fully inhabiting the now and eternity all at once, invited and welcomed by it to an almost overwhelming degree. Tears well up. It can't be helped. In that state, Carey could go days without sleep. And if he couldn't carry his friends along with him, he would just go out and find new ones. And of course, the tragic flip side of that enlightened exuberance was often right around the corner. So many people have asked me in the last weeks and months whether Carey left a note. The answer is no. He left hundreds over the years in eloquent, rigorous, harrowing, and heart-rending emails and letters, in late-night phone calls and barstool vigils, in countless conversations with many of you. I keep looking for the still center in the midst of my suffering, hoping to avoid the twin dangers of self-pity and dejection, Carey wrote in 2004 during a dark episode. At those times, Carey's pain was indescribable. He would soften it or try to deaden it with alcohol or other substances, Those substances would, as he wrote in 2007, cloud my mind and bring me to a place where dying can seem like a logical next step. One ceases to see clearly, he wrote a year later. One mistakes the shadows for the light. And in that state, Carey could be a different person altogether. One who was capable of injuring himself and others in ways that made him frightened and ashamed, and ultimately hopeless. As he wrote to many friends in 2007, after an earlier brush with suicide that summer, the fundamental conundrum, given all the deep-seated destructive forces I still feel I have to overcome within myself, may be summed up in the following. I no longer want to be the person that I am, and I no longer believe I can become the person I would like to be. This was the banner that hung over my death wish, that my personal suffering was both unavoidable and meaningless. And while Carey emerged from that period of darkness, he was haunted by the knowledge that it might return again. Once again, in his own words, "Worst of all, I have been here before many times. The problem is that although the problems haven't changed, a demoralizing fact on its own. As one gets older, the outlook becomes increasingly grim." In the last few years, many of us believed, or perhaps we allowed ourselves to believe, that through proper treatment, Carey had reached a place that, while still turbulent, was at least stable enough to keep him safe. "The demons will always be with me," he wrote me just a few months ago. "I just have to figure out how to make friends with them." Carey never could befriend the demons. He never could find a way to come to terms with and integrate and pacify the side of himself that emerged during those dark times. But he did fight those demons as hard as he could, for as long as he could. On the last full day of his life in December, Carey asked me to meet him on the pretext that he had misplaced his keys and needed my spare copies. This was very plausible. Carey lost his keys more than anyone. In hindsight, it's obvious that this was a final act of compassion, that Carey was making absolutely sure that I would not be the one to open his door and discover him. I met Carey for lunch at Fort Defiance, his local watering hole and home away from home. It was noon. It was a weekday. Carey was sipping an Irish coffee. "You really should try this," he said. I gave him that look of mild disapproval that he disliked so much, but he brushed it aside. "No, dude, seriously, take a sip. It's fucking unbelievable." So I did, and it was. From the bottom of his world, in the middle of carrying out his plan to end his life, Carey was insisting yet again that I taste what he tasted, that I accept this gift of pleasure. And this was truly the most remarkable thing about Carey, that someone who had to fight so hard to live 41 years could teach so many of us so much about how to live better lives ourselves. Carey's gone, but that spirit is alive in everyone he touched, and we're all better for it. Thanks.